Jesus said in John 5:46, "If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me." And that begs the question, how? Moses lived thousands of years before Jesus lived here on earth. Certainly, Old Testament prophecies, promises, and covenants all shine a bright light pointing directly to the promised Messiah. But there is one lesser-known light that is equally as powerful, and these are what the New Testament refer to as types. The word type comes from the Greek tupos, which is a mark formed by a blow that creates an impression. Remember the old-style typewriters? Before the days of computers, they allowed the user to type on a piece of paper by pressing keys that pushed up metal arms called type hammers, with raised letters on them called metal types, that in turn struck an inked ribbon, resulting in a neat printed impression on the paper. Carrying this analogy through to biblical typology, many Old Testament people, objects, and events foreshadowed Jesus' ministry and death. These types were shadows in black and white, a visible impression of a far greater reality yet to come. Interestingly, it is only through the lens of the New Testament do we fully appreciate the typology clues that God left in plain sight in the Old Testament. For example, in Hebrews 5:4-5, we read of Aaron, the very first high priest, who was a type or shadow of Christ. And no one takes this honor on himself, but he receives it when called by God, just as Aaron was. In the same way, Christ did not take on himself the glory of becoming a high priest. Clearly, Aaron did not appoint himself as high priest. This honor was bestowed upon him by God. In the same way, Christ did not glorify himself, but rather this passage makes it clear that he was appointed by God. This brings us to an important principle. The fulfillment is always greater than the type. There must be an increase, an escalation, a heightening between the type, the foreshadow, and the antitype, the fulfillment. Jesus, as our great high priest who spans the gap between us and God, is far greater than Aaron, the high priest who stood as mediator between the Israelites and God. Since centuries separate the numerous types in the Old Testament from their fulfillment in Jesus, it can sometimes be difficult to determine if a person or event is a type or not. In order to recognize types of Christ in the Bible, there are a few general principles. The New Testament will sometimes identify types by either quoting the Old Testament or referring to Old Testament stories. Examples of these explicit types are Melchizedek, Adam, the tabernacle, the Passover, and Jonah. In Matthew 12:40 we read, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Jonah's 3-day experience in the belly of a whale some 800 years earlier was not coincidental, but was in fact an event planned by God as a type of Christ, a foreshadowing of Jesus' burial in the belly of the earth for 3 days. Jonah and the whale were the unwitting type, and Jesus was the glorious fulfillment of the type. Oftentimes, the Bible isn't quite as explicit as the Jonah narrative, and so there are implied types in the lives of Joseph, David, Daniel, and Moses, among others. But in order to identify these types, we should see a fulfillment in the life of Christ that rises naturally from the text without overthinking or forcing it. One such example can be seen in the early life of David. Despite being anointed as the next king of Israel, David was subject to a relentless pursuit by a jealous and rage-filled King Saul, who wanted to do away with his competition. During his time in exile, the long-suffering David may have written Psalm 22, which reads as a companion to the suffering imposed on Christ in his last days on earth. David suffered to such a degree that it prefigured the way Jesus suffered and therefore can be considered a type. Here are a few examples from Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me?" While on the cross, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Scorned by everyone, despised by the people. But they, the crowd, shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. The chief priest said of Jesus, He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants to, for he said, I am the Son of God. They pierced my hands and my feet. But he, Thomas, said to them, Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, I will not believe. They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each one of them. These verses, along with many others from Psalm 22, when taken in totality, are an obvious type. David, as suffering servant and future king, is a shadow of an even greater future reality. Jesus, a suffering servant, crucified, and as a king, reigning forever. When looking through the lens of types, you will develop a deep appreciation for the undeniable link between the Old and New Testaments, with Christ as the bridge and the center of both. When looking for types, keep in mind that they should have a black and white foreshadowing element, and any resemblances are planned by God. Should rise naturally out of the text. Always have an escalation. The fulfillment is better than the type. Point to and give glory to Jesus.